Under the fractured moon, a discarded Omega's whisper became the wind's first howl. The snow fell like forgotten promises, blanketing the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains in a shroud of unrelenting white. Elira Storm stumbled through the howling gale, her breath ragged plumes against the biting cold, each step a defiance against the pack that had cast her out. The air reeked of pine and iron, blood her own, seeping from the fresh brands on her wrists where the silver chains had bitten deep. She was no longer Elira of the Silver Claw Pack. She was nothing, a shadow hurled into the wilds to be claimed by the rogues, those feral outcasts who roamed the borders like ghosts of the damned. Her fingers, numb and trembling, clutched the wolf's fang pendant at her throat, a jagged relic from her mother's final breath, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly under the moon's pale gaze. It was her only anchor, warm against her chilled skin, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The pack elders had sneered as they dragged her to the edge of the territory, their eyes cold as the ice-crusted rivers below. Unworthy, they had spat, their voices a chorus of judgment. An Omega who questions the Alpha's will brings ruin. Let the rogues teach you submission or end you. Elira's mind reeled with the memory, the sting of betrayal sharper than the wind's lash. She had been promised to the Beta Heir, a union to seal alliances, but when she dared voice her doubts about the pack's encroaching war with the neighboring clans, they branded her a traitor. Her father, once a respected scout, had died in that very conflict, his body returned riddled with arrows from a rival's ambush. She had sought truth, not glory, and for it, they stripped her of name and kin. Now, the forest loomed ahead, a labyrinth of shadowed pines where the rogues' howls echoed like fractured prophecies. The cold seeped into her bones, a vice tightening around her heart. She collapsed against a frost-laced boulder, the snow muffling her gasp of pain. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, staining the white ground in crimson petals that steamed faintly in the frigid air. Why fight? The question gnawed at her, a serpent in the quiet. The Deusa Luna, patron of Omegas, was said to weave fates from such despair, but Elira felt only the void. Her body, marked by the Omega's curse of heightened senses and fragile strength, screamed for surrender. Yet the fang pendant warmed again, as if whispering of hidden fires beneath the ice. Hours blurred into a haze of survival. She pressed on, the moon her only compass, its silver light fracturing through the canopy like shattered glass. Distant weavos pierced the night, rogues, circling, drawn by the scent of vulnerability. Elira's pulse thundered in her ears, a drumbeat of fear and fury. She had always been the quiet one, the observer who mapped the stars and read the wind's secrets, but now those gifts felt like burdens. What use was intuition in a world that devoured the insightful? Dawn crept in reluctantly, painting the eastern horizon in bruised purples and golds. Elira crested a ridge, her legs burning, and overlooked a ravine where mist clung like spectral veils. Below, shadows stirred, not the feral chaos she expected, but figures moving with purpose. Rogues, yes, but not the mindless beasts of legend. Gaunt men and women, their eyes hollow with hunger, gathered around crude fires that sputtered against the damp. They were outcasts like her, battered by wars, betrayals, the endless grind of pack politics that favored the strong and discarded the rest. One among them, a wiry female with scars crisscrossing her arms, spotted Elira first. Her snarl softened into wary curiosity. "Fresh meat from the claws?" she called, her voice rough as gravel. Elira straightened, the fang pendant catching the first rays of sun, its runes flaring briefly. Exhaustion warred with instinct. She could run, beg, or stand. But something shifted within her, a spark, unbidden, like the Deusa's breath stirring embers. "Not meat," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "A survivor, And if you're fighting back against those who threw us away, then I'm with you." The group murmured, weapons half raised, rusted blades, improvised spears from broken branches. Their leader, a broad-shouldered male with eyes like storm clouds, stepped forward. "The claws send their weaklings to us as tribute. What makes you different? Girl?" Elira met his gaze, the wind tugging at her tattered cloak, flecked with blood and snow. She thought of her father's maps, hidden in her mind, the passes through the mountains, the weak points in the pack's borders. "I know their secrets," she said softly, the words tasting of risk and revelation. "The trails they patrol, the alliances fracturing under their alpha's greed. Throw me to die, or let me lead you through the storm." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire and the distant rumble of thunder. The rogues exchanged glances, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and wary hope. Elira's heart pounded, the fang at her throat a talisman against the doubt. Was this madness or the first thread of destiny unraveling? In that moment, under the fading moon, she felt the weight of choice, not as victim, but as architect of her own rebirth. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the ravine, the group began to shift, forming ranks with a discipline born of desperation. Elira's voice rose, directing them to higher ground, her words weaving strategy from the chaos. The cold wind carried her commands, and for the first time, it felt like ally rather than foe. But deep within, a whisper lingered. Redemption was no easy crown, and the path ahead would demand blood before dawn's promise. Yet as the makeshift army stirred to life, Elira wondered if the Deusa truly guided her, or if this was merely the illusion of wolves clothing lambs in armor. The fang pulsed warmly, a silent vow amid the gathering storm. The first rays of dawn clawed through the mist-shrouded ravine, gilding the snow in hues of molten gold and revealing the ragged line of rogues Elira had forged from the night's despair. Her breath came in steady bursts now, the wolf's fang pendant a steady thrum against her collarbone, its runes alive with an inner fire that mirrored the resolve hardening in her chest. She stood at the forefront, her voice a low command, cutting through the wind's mournful sigh, directing the outcasts to flank the narrow pass where the Silver Claw patrols were rumored to roam. These rogues, scarred survivors of old wars, their eyes hollowed by betrayal, moved with a tentative unity, spears gripped tight, faces etched with the ghost of hope. Elira's mind raced like the river below, mapping unseen paths, a hidden crevice to the east, a ridge that could ambush the unwary. She was no warrior born, but the Deusa's whispers in the wind had always shown her the unseen currents of the world, and now they surged through her veins like blood. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and pine resin, undercut by something sharper, smoke and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Elira's heightened senses prickled, a warning shiver racing down her spine. She raised a hand, halting the advance, her gaze sweeping the tree line where shadows clung like reluctant lovers. The rogues tensed, murmurs rippling through their ranks like wind over frozen waves. "Quiet," she hissed, the fang warming against her skin, pulsing as if it sensed the approach of fate itself. From the mist emerged a lone figure, staggering from the underbrush like a specter torn from the mountain's heart. He was no rogue, that much was clear, his frame broad and unyielding, cloaked in a tattered fur mantle stained with crimson, a massive broadsword dragging furrows in the snow behind him. Blood matted his dark hair, streaking his face in rivulets that froze against the stubble of his jaw. His eyes, storm-gray and piercing, locked onto Elira's with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. An alpha's gaze, raw and commanding, yet fractured by pain. He collapsed to one knee mere paces away, the impact sending a puff of snow skyward, his labored breaths echoing the distant weavos that haunted these wilds. The rogues surged forward, weapons raised, a snarl collective in their throats. "Intruder!" The wiry female from the night barked, her spear poised, But Elira stepped between them, her heart a wild drumbeat, instinct warring with caution. There was no fear in his posture, only exhaustion etched deep, and something else. A quiet nobility that belied the wounds riddling his torso, visible through rents in his shirt. The scent of him flooded her senses. Pine smoke and ancient earth, laced with the coppery bite of his blood, stirring an unwelcome pull in her core. Omega to Alpha, the bond whispered, unbidden and primal, but she shoved it down, rationalizing it as mere survival's trick. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers clutching the fang. The pendant burned now, a fierce heat against the dawn's chill, as if recognizing kin in his shadowed form. He lifted his head slowly, those gray eyes holding hers without flinching, though pain carved lines around them. "Fenric," he rasped, the name carrying the weight of thunder. "Fenric Volar, king of the Iron Fang realm." A bitter laugh escaped him, muffled by the wind. "Or what remains of it." His words hung in the frosted air, heavy with unspoken ruin. Pursued, he admitted through gritted teeth. Rivals within his own court, scheming betas who had poisoned the well of loyalty, forcing him into exile under cover of night. A blade had found his side in the flight, and the mountains had become both sanctuary and grave. Elira's mind reeled, the pieces slotting into the maps of her memory. The Iron Fang King, whispers of his reign had reached even the Silver Claws, tales of a ruler bound by unyielding duty, haunted by the ghosts of battles won at too great a cost. Guilt shadowed his features, a melancholy veil over the regal lines of his face, as if every scar told a story of choices that bled him dry. Yet there was no plea in his voice, only a weary defiance that mirrored her own. The connection sparked instinctive, a thread pulling taut between them, her empathy sensing the fracture in his soul, his presence awakening a curiosity laced with fear. What madness drew a king to these forsaken heights? And why did her body yearn to bridge the chasm, even as her mind screamed of danger? The rogues shifted uneasily, the broad-shouldered leader growling low. "A king? More like bait for the claws. We finish him here." But Elira held her ground, the fang's warmth spreading through her like liquid fire, urging her forward. She knelt before Fenric, ignoring the rogue's protests, and tore a strip from her cloak to press against his wound. The touch was electric, his skin fever-hot under her fingers, the scent of his blood mingling with hers in a visceral symphony. "You bleed like any other," she murmured, her voice soft but edged with steel. "But if you're hunted, so are we. The claws cast me out for seeing too much, their wars, their lies. Help us stand, and perhaps the dawn spares you." Fenric's hand caught her wrist, gentle yet unyielding, his touch sending a jolt through her that she denied with every rational fiber. Fear bloomed, of the pull, of the vulnerability it promised, but curiosity held her fast, peering into the depths of his gaze where guilt swirled like storm clouds. "You lead these shadows?" he asked, surprise flickering in his eyes, a faint respect kindling amid the pain. An Omega, turning wolves to hounds. There was no mockery, only a quiet awe that stirred something forbidden within her. The wind howled approval, carrying the first echoes of pursuit, Weavos from the south, the claws closing in. Elira pulled away, rising to her feet, the fang cooling as resolve settled. Not hounds, an army. She turned to her makeshift followers, her commands sharp now, weaving Fenric into their ranks as both ally and enigma. He staggered upright, sword in hand, his presence a gravitational force that steadied the chaos. Yet as they moved toward the pass, Elira felt the denial coil tight in her chest, the instinctive bond a dangerous illusion, born of shared exile and the moon's lingering gaze. What strength was this, if it tempted her to heal a king at the cost of her fragile freedom? The sunrise crested fully, bathing the ravine in unrelenting light, and with it came the rumble of approaching foes. Fenric's eyes met hers once more over the shoulder of the ridge, a silent question hanging between them like the frost on the air. In that moment, amid the gathering storm, Illyra wondered if the Diusa wove redemption from such fragile threads, or if curiosity would be her undoing. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The narrow pass twisted like a serpent's spine through the Frostfang's unforgiving heart, its walls sheer cliffs of ice-veined granite that funneled the wind into a relentless dirge. Illyra led the ragged procession with measured steps, the wolf's fang pendant swaying against her chest like a pendulum marking the fragile rhythm of their escape. Snowflakes danced in the pale morning light, each one a fleeting veil over the bloodstains marring the path, traces of Fenric's wounds, now hastily bound with strips from her cloak. The rogues flanked them, their breaths sinking into a collective hush, spears and blades glinting dully under the climbing sun. Fenric walked at her side, his broad frame a shadowed bulwark, every labored stride a testament to the iron will that had forged him into legend. Yet his presence pressed against her senses, an insistent tide of pine-scented warmth amid the chill, stirring the instinctive pull she fought to rationalize as mere alliance-born necessity. The Uivos from the south grew insistent, a chorus of pursuit that clawed at the edges of her resolve. Silver-claw scouts. No doubt, swift and merciless, their loyalty bought with the promise of glory in the pack's endless wars. Illyra's mind mapped the terrain instinctively, the Diusa's gifts unfurling like hidden roots, a cleft in the rock ahead, narrow enough to bottleneck an assault, wide enough for their band to slip through to the sheltered hollow beyond. "There," she murmured to Fenric, pointing with a gloved hand, her voice low to pierce only his hearing. "A refuge if we hold the line." His gray eyes met hers, shadowed by pain, but alight with a fierce clarity that sent an unwelcome shiver through her core. Not fear exactly, but the raw edge of recognition, as if his guilt mirrored her own buried shame. He nodded, gripping his broadsword tighter, the blade's edge whispering against its scabbard. "You've eyes for the unseen, Omega, like the winds that whisper to the lost." The words hung between them, laced with a melancholy respect that chipped at her defenses. She wanted to deny it, to see him as just another exile burdened by duty's chains. But empathy bloomed unbidden, a quiet ache for the king who carried his realm's fractures in every scar. His side wept fresh blood through the makeshift bandage, the crimson stark against the white fur of his mantle, and she caught herself reaching to steady him, only to pull back, as if burned. What was this softness, creeping through the armor of her isolation? The fang warmed against her skin, a subtle pulse urging connection, but she quelled it with a sharp breath, focusing on the crunch of snow underfoot. The cleft loomed, a jagged maw in the cliffside, and Illyra signaled the rogues to fan out. The wiry female, Alara, took position with a grim nod, her scarred arms coiling like springs. "We'll buy you the hollow, Commander," she said, the title slipping from her lips like an offering, heavy with the weight of newfound trust. Fenric positioned himself at the narrowest point, his stance unyielding despite the pallor etching his features. Illyra lingered a moment, her gaze tracing the lines of exhaustion on his face, the furrow of his brow, the faint tremor in his jaw. Guilt radiated from him, a spiritual fog she could almost taste. Born of thrones, stained by betrayal and battles where mercy had been a luxury he could ill afford. "Fight not for me," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts, "but for the dawn you claim." The first scouts crested the rise with a thunder of paws on ice, their silver pelts flashing like blades in the light. 6 strong, armored in leather etched with claw runes, their eyes burning with the pack's unquenchable hunger for dominance. The lead warrior, a hulking beta with a notched axe, bellowed a challenge that echoed off the stones. "Traitors whelp! The alpha claims your head, and these curs with it!" Arrows whistled from their bows, slicing the air with lethal intent. Chaos erupted in a visceral storm. Elira dove behind a boulder, her heart slamming against her ribs as she directed the rogue's counter, spears thrusting through the bottleneck, forcing the scouts into a deadly funnel. Fenric roared, his sword a silver arc that cleaved the air, meeting the beta's axe in a clash that showered sparks and blood onto the snow. The impact reverberated through her bones, the scent of hot iron flooding her nostrils, mingling with the acrid bite of fierce sweat from her companions. Elara's spear found a mark, piercing a scout's thigh with a wet crunch, while another rogue fell with an arrow in his shoulder, his cry swallowed by the wind's howl. Elira's world narrowed to the rhythm of survival, the thud of her pulse, the cold sting of snow against her palms as she knocked a scavenged bow, loosing an arrow that grazed a scout's arm. But her eyes kept drifting to Fenric, watching the king move like a tempest contained, each swing precise, born of duty's forge, yet laced with a sorrow that made her chest tighten. A scout lunged past the line, blade raised for her throat, and Fenric was there, intercepting with a backhand that sent the attacker sprawling into the drift. His hand found her arm, steadying her, the touch lingering a fraction too long, igniting a spark that raced through her veins. Empathy surged then, unresisted for the first time, a flood of his pain seeping into her, the weight of a crown forged in his father's blood, the ghosts of allies betrayed by court intrigue, the solitary vigil under moons that offered no solace. "You see too much," he grunted, pulling her toward the cleft as the rogues pressed the advantage, driving the remnants back with howls of defiance. Blood slicked the snow in crimson veins, steaming faintly, and the air thrummed with the aftermath's hush, panting breaths, the drip of melting ice. They stumbled into the hollow, a cavernous bowl ringed by overhanging rocks that muffled the outer world, its floor dusted with ancient pine needles and sheltered by a canopy of frozen boughs. The rogues collapsed in exhausted clusters, tending wounds by the flicker of a hastily kindled fire, its flames dancing shadows across Fenric's face as he sank against the wall. Elira knelt beside him, the fang pendant glowing faintly in the dim light, as if feeding on the shared heat of their survival. She unwound the bloodied cloth from his side, exposing the gash, a deep furrow from an assassin's dagger, edges ragged and inflamed. Her fingers worked methodically, cleaning it with snow-melted water from a canteen, but each brush against his skin wove the bond tighter. His breath hitched, not from pain alone, but from the intimacy of her care, the way her touch soothed the deeper wounds, the guilt that festered like untreated poison. "Why help me?" he asked, voice rough as gravel, his gray eyes searching hers in the fire's glow. "A king is no ally to rogues, or to one cast aside." She paused, the warmth of the fangs spreading through her chest, mirroring the reluctant tenderness uncoiling within. "Because exile strips us bare," she replied, her words soft against the crackle of flames. "And in the bare, we find what's worth the fight, not power, but the choice to heal what power breaks." The admission hung between them, a bridge of vulnerability amid the cavern's chill. Fear lingered, rationalizing the pull as shared desperation. But curiosity yielded to something deeper. A bond forged in blood and fire. Empathy transforming isolation into quiet strength. The wind outside whispered secrets through the rocks, carrying the faint weevos of retreating foes. But here, in this fragile refuge, Elira felt the Deuce's hand, turning enemies to kin, one heartbeat at a time. Yet as Fenric's hand covered hers briefly, a silent vow in the touch, doubt flickered like the dying embers. Was this bond redemption's light, or the illusion that would bind her to another cage? The fang pulsed steadily, a symbol of paths yet unwoven, as the hollow's shadows deepened with the promise of trials to come. The fire's embers pulsed like a captive heartbeat in the hollow's dim embrace, casting flickering runes of light across the cavern walls where frost clung in crystalline veins. Elira sat cross-legged on the needle-strewn floor, the wolf's fang pendant resting heavy against her chest, its warmth a counterpoint to the chill seeping from the stones. The rogues had scattered into uneasy rest, their snores mingling with the distant drip of melting ice, but sleep evaded her. Fenric lay nearby, his broad chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. The gash on his side now sealed with a poultice of crushed herbs she'd foraged from the hollow's shadowed edges, bitter roots that smelled of earth and forgotten oaths. His face, slack in repose, bore the etchings of a king unmade, lines carved by decisions that had spilled rivers of blood, eyes closed against the guilt that haunted even his dreams. She watched him, the instinctive pull no longer a whisper, but a tide eroding her resolve. Rationalization frayed at the edges. This was alliance, nothing more, born of shared exile under the Deuce's indifferent gaze. Yet empathy coiled deeper, a spiritual thread binding her to his fractures. The wind outside the cleft moaned like a lament, carrying the faint, acrid scent of smoke from the pass where their victory had stained the snow red. Blood and fire, the moon's eternal companions, had bought them this fragile peace, but Elira felt the weight of what lingered unspoken. The scout's retreat was no surrender, only a gathering storm. Her fingers traced the fang absent-mindedly, its runes stirring faintly, as if sensing the unrest in her soul. A low groan pulled her from reverie. Fenric stirred, his gray eyes fluttering open, shadowed by fever's haze. He pushed himself up on one elbow, wincing as the movement tugged at his wound, but his gaze found hers unerringly, piercing through the firelit gloom. The hollow. It holds, he murmured, voice roughened by pain and the night's toll. Your doing, Pathfinder. The title slipped from him like a revelation, laced with a quiet certainty that sent a jolt through her. How had he known? Whispers of Omegas gifted with sight beyond the veil had reached even Ironfang courts, but to name her so, to see the hidden currents she navigated, stirred a fear laced with forbidden thrill. Elira shifted, the pendant flaring hot against her skin, as if awakening to his words. A name for shadows, she replied softly, her voice a thread in the cavern's hush. The Deuce's jest on the discarded. But even as she spoke, the air thickened, the wind's moan swelling into a chorus of weavos that echoed from the peaks. Not pursuit this time, but something older, primal. The hollow trembled subtly, dust sifting from the ceiling like ash from a dying star. Her senses sharpened, the Omega's curse blooming into gift, sense layered upon sense, the metallic tang of approaching rain mingling with the deeper earthen pulse of the mountain itself. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind, paths unwinding like silver threads under the moon, revealing chasms hidden from mortal eyes, trails that led not to ruin, but to forgotten sanctuaries. Fenric's hand reached out, steadying himself against her arm, the touch igniting the bond anew. His skin was fever-warm, his blood scent rising sharp and intimate, but it was his eyes that held her, storm-gray depths swirling with recognition. No jest, he said, his voice gaining strength, laced with the melancholy of one who had long sought such signs. In my dreams, before the blade found me, I saw a figure in the dawn, leading shadows through the frost, her light a fang against the dark. You, Elira. The Deuce's hand, weaving fates I thought severed. Guilt shadowed his confession, a spiritual burden he carried like a crown of thorns. He, who had ruled with iron mercy, now saw in her the key to his realm's unraveling curse. A prophecy from the lunar temples, spoken of an Omega whose sight would guide the fallen king to redemption or oblivion. The pendant burned now, a fierce ember against her heart, and with it came the manifestation, unbidden, overwhelming. The hollow's walls dissolved in her vision, replaced by a tapestry of light. Glowing paths, snaking through the frost fangs, one veined with crimson peril, another shimmering silver toward a distant temple where moonlight pooled like liquid silver. She gasped, clutching the fang as the world tilted, her body trembling with the force of revelation. The rogues stirred, murmuring in alarm, but Fenric's grip tightened, anchoring her. "Breathe," he urged, his voice a low rumble that cut through the surge. "Show me what the winds hide." Empathy flooded her then, not just his pain but a shared destiny, his guilt mirroring her rejection, two wounds destined to heal or destroy. Words tumbled from her lips, guided by the Diusa's breath. The claws march not alone. Your rivals whisper in their ears, a betrayal forged in the old wars. But here, she pointed blindly, her hand tracing the air where the vision lingered. A pass veiled by avalanche scars leading to the lunar spire. There, the ancient rites can bind the packs, or shatter them. The images sharpened, Fenric's court, riddled with traitors, the poison of ambition spreading like frostbite, her own pack's elders, puppets in a greater game. The fang glowed visibly now, its runes casting prismatic light on the cavern floor, illuminating the rogues' awed faces. Ilara knelt closer, her scars catching the ethereal gleam. "She's the seer," she whispered, reverence threading her gravel voice. Fenric's breath caught, his free hand covering the pendant where it touched her skin. The contact electric, a bridge of fire and blood under the spiritual moon. He saw it then, the truth etching deeper into his soul. She was no mere survivor, but the pathfinder of legend, her gift, the key to unlocking his cursed throne. Guilt warred with hope in his eyes, the weight of duty pressing like the mountain above. "I've spilled rivers for power," he confessed, voice breaking on the edge of tragedy, believing strength lay in the blade. But you offer mercy's map. What is a king without the path to atone? The question hung, a moral precipice, his melancholy gaze pleading for her to affirm the bond she still resisted, rationalized as fate's cruel trick, yet blooming into reluctant acceptance. Ilara pulled back slightly, the vision fading, leaving her drained yet alive with purpose. The wind howled approval outside, carrying the scent of impending snow, and the fire crackled as if echoing the fang's pulse. Fear lingered, a rational shadow over the revelation's light. To be the key meant chains of destiny, her freedom traded for his redemption. Yet in his touch, the tenderness born of pain whispered of renascimento, the Deusa weaving love not as reward, but as the hardest proof. The hollow seemed smaller now, charged with the gravity of choices unborn, blood and moonlight their silent witnesses. Was strength the mercy to guide a broken king, or the freedom to walk alone into the storm? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The storm broke with a fury that shook the lunar spire's ancient stones, wind lashing like the Deuce's unanswered prayers, carrying the metallic tang of blood from the valleys below. Illyra stood at the temple's crumbling threshold, the wolf's fang pendant clutched in her fist, its runes pulsing with a light that mirrored the lightning fracturing the sky. The revelation's afterglow had propelled them here through hidden paths, only her vision unveiled. Silver threads weaving past avalanches and ambushes, the rogues' footsteps muffled by snowdrifts that swallowed their doubts. Fenric moved at her side, his wound a dull throb now, bandaged anew in the hollow's quiet hours, but the guilt in his gray eyes burned fiercer than any fever. He had spoken little since her gift manifested, his melancholy a veil thicker than the gathering clouds, as if the weight of destiny pressed him toward atonement he feared he could not claim. The spire rose like a forgotten fang from the mountain's crown, its walls etched with lunar glyphs that glowed faintly under the storm's prelude, a sanctuary where Omegas of old had communed with the moon's secrets. But peace was an illusion. The air hummed with approaching howls, a symphony of the past converging. Elira's senses sharpened, the Omega's intuition flaring like embers in the gale, scents of pine smoke and iron, the acrid bite of betrayal from the south. Her pack, the Silver Claws, had not yielded to the scouts' defeat. They marched now, bolstered by shadows from Fenric's own realm. The traitor revealed in her vision loomed large, Lord Kale, a beta from the Iron Fang court, his ambition a poison that had seeped into claw alliances, forging a pact to topple both kings and claim the Frostfang's frozen throne. Elara gripped her spear tighter, her scarred face set in grim resolve as the rogues formed a defensive ring around the spire's base. "They come for blood, Commander," she growled, eyes scanning the mist-choked slopes. Fenric's hand rested on his broadsword's hilt, his stance unyielding, yet Elira felt the tremor in him, not fear of battle, but the ethical precipice of confronting the fractures he had wrought. "Kyle was my shadow," he murmured to her, voice low against the wind's roar, guilt carving deeper lines into his features. "I elevated him from the wars, blind to the serpent in his loyalty. For duty's sake, I spilled blood that might have been spared. Now it returns to claim us both." Elira's heart clenched, empathy a double-edged blade slicing through her resistance. The bond, once rationalized as survival's fleeting spark, now tugged insistent, urging her toward him amid the chaos. Freedom whispered of flight, down untrodden paths her gift could reveal, leaving the kings and their wars to devour themselves. But love, that reluctant proof, bloomed in the spaces between, born of shared wounds, her rejection a mirror to his shame, both cast as architects of ruin by those they trusted. The fang warmed against her palm, a symbol of choices etched in bone, as the first wave crested the ridge, silver claw warriors, pelts silvered by sleet, led by the rival Alpha, Thorn, her former betrothed. His eyes, cold as glacial steel, locked on her with possessive fury, the pack's elders flanking him like specters of judgment. "Traitor's bride!" Thorn bellowed, his voice a thunderclap that silenced the wind momentarily, his massive frame armored in rune-etched leather, axe gleaming with fresh oil. "You slither from the wilds with rogues and a fallen king? The Dusa rejects the weak. Return, submit, or die as the outcast you are." Arrows rained, whistling through the air like vengeful spirits, embedding in the spire's walls with splintering cracks. The rogues countered, spears thrusting from cover, blood spraying in crimson arcs that steamed on the frozen ground. Elira ducked behind a glyph-carved pillar, her breath ragged, the scent of gunpowder from improvised firebombs mingling with the earthy musk of exertion. Fenric surged forward, his sword a blur of steel meeting Thorn's axe in a clash that echoed like cracking ice. Sparks flew, illuminating the storm's fury, and Elira's world narrowed to the visceral dance. The king's movements precise, yet burdened, each parry laced with the melancholy of a man atoning through blade. But Thorn pressed, his strikes fueled by the pack's doctrine, power over mercy, hierarchy unchallenged. "Your realm crumbles, Volar," he snarled, glancing at Elira with a leer that twisted her gut. "She was mine to break, not yours to redeem. Kyle promises the claws your throne if we deliver your head." From the shadows emerged the traitor himself, Lord Kyle, sleek and silver-haired, his dagger poisoned and eyes gleaming with calculated ambition. He circled the fray, whispering commands to claw archers, his betrayal a living wound to Fenric's soul. The king faltered for a heartbeat, guilt flashing raw in his gaze as he locked eyes with Kyle. "You were brother in arms," Fenric roared, voice breaking on the edge of tragedy. "Forged in the same fires. Why this poison?" Kyle's laugh was a serpent's hiss, cold as the sleet stinging their skin. "Duty blinds kings, but ambition frees them. Your mercy weakened Ironfang. Now with the claws, I claim what you squandered." Elira's vision surged unbidden, the fang blazing like a star in her grasp, revealing the moral crossroads. Thorn's forces swelling from hidden flanks, Kale's dagger poised for Fenric's back. Freedom tempted, slip away through the spire's veiled tunnels, her gift a solitary shield. Or forgiveness, that hardest war, step into the fray, bridge the packs with truth unveiled, choosing love's redemptive chain over isolation's hollow liberty. Empathy overwhelmed her, Fenric's pain flooding her veins like shared blood. The ethical king, marked by duty's scars, fighting not for glory but to heal the rifts his rule had torn. She rose, the wind whipping her cloak like wings, and cried out, her voice cutting through the din like moonlight on steel. "Thorn! Elders! The wars you chase are Kale's web. He poisons both thrones for his crown." Heads turned, the battle stuttering as her words wove doubt, the fang's light casting ethereal beams that illuminated Kale's retreat into shadows. Thorn hesitated, axe lowered, his eyes flickering with the ghost of their betrothal's promise, now soured by rejection's sting. Fenric glanced back, his gray eyes meeting hers in a moment of profound connection. The bond accepted, not as reward, but as the proof of strength in mercy's choice. He nodded, a silent vow amid the blood-slicked snow, as rogues and claws clashed anew, the confrontation fracturing alliances like the storm-rent sky. Yet as Kale lunged from the mist, dagger flashing toward Fenric's unguarded side, Elira's heart teetered on the precipice. War or pardon? Bind to this king, healing his guilt at freedom's cost, or shatter the cycle with a blade of her own? The fang pulsed urgently, blood and thunder their chorus, the Deuce's judgment hanging in the balance of one Omega's unyielding choice. In that visceral storm, strength revealed itself not in conquest, but in the mercy to forgive what power could not. The dagger's arc sliced the storm's fury, Kale's poisoned blade a serpent's strike aimed at Fenric's exposed flank, the metal glinting with lethal promise under the lightning's jagged vein. Elira's cry tore from her throat, raw and unbidden, the wolf's fang pendant flaring like a captured star against her chest, its heat surging through her veins as if the Deusa herself seized her will. Time fractured in that heartbeat, the wind's howl a dirge for choices unmade, the scent of ozone and blood thick as the sleet stinging her face. Freedom beckoned, a shadowed path uncoiling in her mind's eye. Slip into the spire's depths, her gift a solitary lantern through the labyrinthine tunnels below, leaving the kings to their thrones of ruin. No chains of destiny, no healing of a guilt that was not hers to bear. Yet love, that tragic proof, rooted her feet to the blood-slicked stone, empathy a flood drowning rational retreat. She lunged, her body moving on instinct's tide, the pendant's pulse syncing with her heart's thunderous rhythm. Her hand closed around a fallen spear, rusted and splintered from the fray, thrusting it forward to intercept Kale's path. The impact jarred her bones, the wood cracking against his wrist with a visceral snap that echoed off the spire's glyphs. Kyle recoiled, his silver eyes widening in shock, the dagger skittering across the ice-veined floor where it steamed faintly from the poison's residue. "Witch!" he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss lost in the gale, ambition's mask cracking to reveal the fear beneath. Fenric whirled, his broadsword sweeping in a protective arc that forced Kale back. The king's gray eyes flashing gratitude laced with sorrow, a silent acknowledgement of the bond she could no longer deny. The battle raged anew, a maelstrom of steel and shadow encircling the temple's threshold. Thorn's warriors pressed from the flanks, their silver pelts matted with sleet and crimson, axes biting into rogue shields with the crunch of shattering bone. Elara fought like a tempest incarnate, her spear a whirlwind that felled two claws in a spray of arterial heat, her scarred arms glistening with sweat and blood under the storm's relentless lash. But the air thickened with the weight of revelation, Elira's earlier words sowing discord like seeds in fractured soil. Whispers rippled through the claw ranks, doubts about Kale's pact, the elder's eyes darting to their alpha rival with newfound wariness. Thorn bellowed commands, his massive frame barreling toward Fenric, axe raised high, but hesitation flickered in his glacial stare, the ghost of their betrothal, a chain he could not fully sever. Elira pressed against the pillar's cold embrace, her breath ragged plumes in the chill. The fang's warmth the only anchor amid the chaos. Visions assaulted her, unbidden torrents from the deuce's loom. Thorn's pack, torn by internal betrayal, their wars not for honor, but Kael's hidden gold from forgotten mines. Fenric's court, a web of intrigue where mercy had been branded weakness, his guilt a crown heavier than iron. Empathy clawed at her core, not just for the king whose touch lingered like fire on her skin, but for the pack that had cast her out, their fear of her insight a mirror to her own dread of vulnerability. Forgiveness tempted, a moral flame. Step forward, unveil the full tapestry of Kael's deceit, bind the fractured packs in a fragile truce. Or war, that easier fury. Let the blades sing. Freedom carved from the corpses of old wounds, her army of rogues rising unchained. Fenric parried Thorn's onslaught, their weapons clashing in a symphony of sparks that illuminated the storm-ravaged slopes, his movements a dance of duty and despair. Blood trickled from a fresh gash on his forearm, mingling with the rain to trace red rivers down his arm, the scent sharp and intimate, pulling at her omega senses like a siren's call. "Elira!" he called over the din, his voice breaking through the thunder, gray eyes locking on hers with desperate clarity. The spire's heart, the lunar right, it can seal truths none can deny. Guilt etched his plea, the ethical king offering not command, but choice, his melancholy a spiritual fog that enveloped her. He had spilled blood for realms, believing power's price was isolation. Now in her, he saw redemption's fragile bridge, love as the war he could not win alone. Kael circled like a shadow, rallying a cadre of iron-fanged turncoats who had slunk from the mist, their blades poisoned with the same treachery that festered in his soul. He struck at a rogue, dagger plunging deep, the victim's cry a guttural wail swallowed by the wind. Elira's vision sharpened then, the fang blazing, revealing his endgame, a hidden cache of lunar relics within the spire, artifacts that could bend packs to a false king's will. Freedom screamed for her to expose it alone, vanish into the temple's veins, her gift a weapon for self alone. But the bond with Fenric tugged insistent. Born of shared exile, his pain echoing her rejection. A symphony of souls marked for healing. What was strength, if not the mercy to forgive the unforgivable, to choose love's chains over liberty's hollow echo? She broke from cover, the storm whipping her cloak like furious wings, the pendant's light cutting through the sleet as she climbed the spire's steps toward its glowing apex. Thorn lunged after her, axe grazing her shoulder in a hot line of pain, blood blooming warm against the cold fabric. "You dare command what was mine?" he roared, his breath hot with rage and buried longing, the rival alpha's eyes stormy with the pack's unyielding creed. Fenric intercepted, their clash a thunderous ballet that shook the stones, buying her moments as rogues and claws clashed in a tide of fur and fury below. Ilara's spear found another traitor, her growl a vow of loyalty forged in the hollow's fire. At the threshold's heart, Elira knelt before the lunar altar, a basin of polished obsidian veined with silver, where moonlight pooled eternally, even through the storm's veil. Her blood dripped into it from the wound, mingling with ancient waters that steamed and swirled, the fang amplifying her gift into a radiant cascade. Visions erupted for all. Kael's letters of pact, sealed with iron fang wax, promising thrones built on lies, the elders' complicity, their greed a shadow over the Deuce's light. Gasps rippled through the fray, weapons faltering as truth unveiled the moral rot. Thorn staggered, axe lowering, his face a mask of betrayal's sting. Lies, All for power? He muttered, the pack's chorus turning inward, Uivos shifting from hunt to lament. Kale fled toward the shadows, but Fenric pursued, sword pinning him against the cliff's edge, the traitor's eyes wild with cornered desperation. "Mercy, my king!" Kale pleaded, voice cracking, but Fenric's gaze held steady, guilt warring with justice. Elira rose, the right's light fading, her body trembling with the expenditure, empathy a bridge extended. "Pardon him," she whispered, stepping forward, the choice crystallizing in her soul. Love over war, forgiveness the redemption that freed them both. Freedom's path dimmed, replaced by the warmth of union's proof, the deuce's whisper in the wind. Strength lay not in solitude, but in the ethical fire to heal what destiny broke. Yet as Thorn's warriors knelt in dawning fealty, and Kale's fate hung in Fenric's hand, doubt lingered like the storm's retreating rumble. Was this mercy the crown of rebirth, or the illusion that bound her wings? The fang cooled against her skin, blood and moonlight witnesses to the precipice, where one final choice would forge or shatter their intertwined fates. In the spire's hush, amid the scent of rain-washed earth and lingering iron, Elira felt the weight of love's true trial, not conquest, but the compassionate war against the self. The storm's fury ebbed into a mournful whisper, the wind sighing through the lunar spire's fractured arches like the Deuce's final breath, carrying the mingled scents of rain-soaked earth and cooling blood across the bloodied threshold. Elira stood trembling at the altar's edge, the wolf's fang pendant dimming against her chest, its runes fading from the rite's ethereal blaze to a steady, intimate warmth that echoed the fragile pulse of her resolve. Her shoulder throbbed where Thorn's axe had kissed her flesh, blood seeping in slow rivulets that traced crimson paths down her arm, staining the obsidian basin where truths had been forged in silver light. The air hung heavy, thick with the hush of revelation. The pack's weavos silenced, replaced by the drip of melting sleet from the temple's eaves and the ragged breaths of warriors kneeling in the muddied snow. Fenric held Kale pinned against the cliff's unyielding face, the traitor's silver hair plastered to his brow, eyes wide with the terror of a serpent exposed. The broadsword's tip hovered at Kale's throat, a bead of blood welling where steel met skin, steaming faintly in the chill. Fenric's frame loomed like a shadowed monolith, his gray eyes storm-tossed, guilt a visible shroud over the regal lines of his jaw, etched deeper by the weight of brotherhood betrayed. Rain traced the scars on his face, mingling with the sweat of battle, and Elira felt it all, the ethical king's torment flooding her senses like shared blood, his melancholy a spiritual tide pulling at the bond she had chosen to embrace. Love, not as fleeting reward, but as the hardest proof, had rooted her here, her freedom's solitary path surrendered to this union of wounds. "Pardon him," she repeated, her voice a quiet thunder cutting through the hush, stepping forward over the slick stones, the pendant swaying like a talisman of mercy's gamble. The rogues watched from their defensive ring, Ilara's spear lowered but ready, her scarred face a mask of wary awe. Thorn knelt nearby, his massive form bowed, the rival alpha's glacial eyes lifting to hers with a flicker of something raw. Regret, perhaps, for the betrothal shattered by his pack's unyielding creed. The elders murmured, their judgments unraveling like frost under dawn, the revelation's light having stripped bare the web of ambition that had ensnared them all. Fenric's gaze met Elira's, a profound connection sparking in that suspended moment, his hand steady on the hilt, yet trembling with the precipice of choice. Guilt warred in his depths, the king who had spilled rivers for duty, now confronted with compassion's blade, sharper than any steel. "He poisoned my court," Fenric rasped, voice rough as gravel ground under boot, rain tracing the lines of his exhaustion. "Betrayed the oaths that bound us, spilled blood for thrones built on lies. What mercy spares such a shadow?" But even as he spoke, his eyes softened, the melancholy yielding to the empathy she had awakened. a recognition that power's true curse was isolation, and redemption lay in healing what the crown had broken. Kale twisted, desperation cracking his composure. "Kill me, and you're no better than the wars you decry." He spat, voice laced with venom, but fear undercut the bravado, his body tensing against the cliff's bite. Elira knelt beside them, the cold stone grinding into her knees, her bloodied hand reaching to cover Fenric's on the sword. The touch was electric, a bridge of fire amid the storm's retreat, the fang pulsing in harmony with their joined pulses. Visions lingered at her mind's edge, futures unwoven, Kale's death a spark for endless vendetta, or his life a testament to forgiveness's forge, turning traitor to guardian under the Diusa's watchful moon. "Strength is not the blade's swing," she whispered, her words intimate, poetic threads weaving through the rain's patter. "It is choosing mercy when power screams for blood. Let him live. Fenric, bind him to atonement, as the Diusa binds us." The king hesitated, the wind stirring his dark hair, carrying the faint howl of distant peaks as if the mountains themselves bore witness. His free hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a streak of rain and blood, the gesture tender-born of pain, sealing the bond's acceptance. No longer resisted, no longer rationalized as exile's illusion. It bloomed now, a renascimento forged in sacrifice. Her freedom yielded for his healing, his guilt transmuted through her compassionate light. With a slow exhale, Fenric lowered the sword, the tip carving a shallow line across Kale's collarbone, a mark of warning, not death. "Live, brother in shadow," he commanded, voice steady with ethical resolve, "and serve the pacts you sought to shatter, or the next storm claims you without mercy." Kyle slumped, breath hitching, the ambition in his eyes fracturing into reluctant submission, chains of truth heavier than iron. Thorn rose then, his axe sheathed, approaching with measured steps that crunched the thawing snow. "The claws! We followed lies," he admitted, voice gruff, the rival's pride yielding to the right's unyielding verity. "You lead not as victim, Elira, but as pathfinder. If the Diusa wills union, we stand with the dawn you forged." The elders nodded, their chorus of judgment silenced, packs mingling in the sleet's hush, rogues and claws, shadows and silver, bound by the moral fire of her choice. Fenric pulled Elira to her feet, his arm encircling her waist, the warmth of his body a bulwark against the lingering chill, blood and rain mingling on their skin like a sacred vow. The pendant rested between them, cool now, its purpose fulfilled, a symbol of paths chosen, rejections reborn into destiny's embrace. Empathy flowed unhindered, his guilt easing like mist under sun, her heart alight with the proof of love. Not conquest, but the compassionate war that healed both exile and throne. The spire's glyphs glowed softly, moonlight piercing the clouds in silver shafts, bathing the assembly in ethereal peace. Weavos rose anew, not of hunt, but harmony, echoing through the frost fangs as the storm fully broke, revealing a sky bruised yet promising. In that renascimento, amid the scent of wet pine and fading iron, Elira leaned into Fenric's strength, the Deusa's whisper in the wind affirming the union. Sacrifice had carved their path, her solitary sight shared, his solitary crown lightened, and from it sprang healing, a love that transcended hierarchies, proving redemption's quiet crown. Yet in the depths of her soul, a final echo lingered, freedom's shadow, a reminder that even in embrace, the moon's light demanded eternal choice. Blood and fire had yielded to mercy's flame, and under the watchful stars, two broken souls stepped into the dawn as one. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.